Have I just been bought by the Chinese government?
Okay, come on in, sit down. We're going to get started here. So, plenty of seats up front. Everybody, come on in. I'm Debbie Liu. I'm the Executive Director of ESIG, the Energy Systems Integration Group, and I wanted to welcome you all to our 19th Forecasting and Meteorology Workshop. So thanks all for joining us. Oh, I wanted to start by asking, who of you has never been to an ESIG workshop before? Who's new? Oh, wow, that's a lot of people. Okay, so it's like half of you guys are new. That's great. Well, welcome. Really appreciate you being here. I wanted to let you know, ESIG is a member-driven organization, and our members are the core of ESIG. So our members are what makes ESIG great. It's you all sharing your knowledge, sharing your experience that makes this a great organization. So who of you is a member organization? Let's just see. Okay, yeah, an awful lot of you. So for those of you who aren't, I hope you enjoy the workshop and you might want to consider becoming members. One of the benefits of being a member is that you can see the 1,600 individuals from the member organizations participate in working groups, user groups, and task forces. And right now, we have a large list of active working groups and task forces across different things on planning, resource adequacy, markets, DERs, reliability, all different sorts of topics. And if you have topics that you are interested in that you think other members also would like to start a task force in, you can come to any of us, including Justin, who runs the System Operations and Market Design Working Group, and talk to us about trying to start up a new effort. So a few disclaimers. Our meetings are open to everyone. There's a broad range of participants here. If there's any regulators or state policymakers, if there's any ex parte information that gets raised, I ask that you excuse yourself from that portion of a meeting if the discussion enters topics that could be of concern. We also ask that you please obey any antitrust laws and guidelines. Please avoid anti-competitive behavior, especially at any ESIG meeting. And then finally, we don't tolerate any discrimination or harassment. And we ask that everyone be respectful. This is a learning environment. No question is a bad question. Feel free to ask any questions and just be appropriate and respectful with all other participants. So this week, we've got a whole bunch of different workshops going on. The one that you're in right now is shown here in orange, but you can see that tomorrow there's also going to be stuff on large loads. There's going to be a networking reception tomorrow evening. And then on Wednesday, there will be other things on large loads, AI, grid enhancing technologies, and Encore is doing a networking social afterwards. And for today, this afternoon, and tomorrow, I've got the wrong title on this, so ignore the title on this, but the agenda is correct. We are covering the latest advancements in renewables forecasting. We'll be discussing damage prediction from extreme weather events, everything from hail to hurricanes to fire. We'll be talking about emerging issues in solar forecasting. We'll be talking about wildfire risk and public safety power shutoff forecasting. We'll be talking about probabilistic applications of forecasts and with the focus on operations here. And then one of the biggest topics these days is large loads and data centers. We'll end tomorrow with a large load operational forecasting and flexibility session. So hope you enjoy the program. And I wanted to end with a big thanks to our workshop sponsors. So big thanks to Encore, Polaris, WEG, and Zero Node. Thank you for sponsoring this workshop. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Justin Sharp of EPRI, who's going to chair the first panel on the latest advancements in renewables forecasting.
Oops. Thanks, Debbie. Debbie, is there any chance you can just push this screen back a little bit? I don't think people can see it from the panel. I have the honor of being able to open this part of the conference and then also do this morning's as well. So thank you to ESIG for that. So this session is actually one of my favorite sessions. We do it every year. It's kind of an update on where we've been going with foundational modeling, and then some talks about some of the improvements in both research modeling and also in its application within the sector itself. So that we have the creating the weather forecast and then using the weather forecast to make estimates of wind generation and solar forecasts and provide load forecasting as well. So we're going to start with Dave Turner, who is at ESRL, and he's going to sort of go through some of the latest improvements in the NOAA models, and this has been something we do every year, and it's a really great talk. And then Sue is going to follow up with a talk on data and AI, and the whole rest of the session is going to have like an AI bent, because that's where we're really pushing things at the moment and where a lot of the advancements are being made. And then we'll have two forecasts, one from Craig Collier and one from Lars Roa, that if they both provide forecasts to the end user sector. So that's that conversion of the weather information into actionable information for end users. So without further ado, I'll ask Dave to come up and give his talk on NOAA's updates.
So thank you very much, Justin. Thank you for everyone coming in. Hopefully you enjoyed lunch. I'm going to give you an update on some of NOAA's recent work on its high-resolution rapid refresh forecast models. This is an effort that's really multiple laboratories. So NOAA laboratories involved with this, although I also have a contribution today from the National Lab of the Rockies in here also. So for some of you, about a year ago, I gave an update on the rapid refresh forecast system, the RRFS. In the government, we pronounce every acronym, so that's RUFUS. So I talked about RUFUS. RUFUS is a 3-kilometer rapidly updating model. What do we mean by rapidly updating? That means it's restarted every hour, using all the available observations you have to try to get the best initial conditions. So this modeling system is actually designed to simplify NOAA's operational suite. So in our operational suite, we have a large number of regional modeling systems here, and they're actually quite difficult to maintain because there's so many of them with lots of development teams using a lot of compute resources. They came organically to do different things, and so we're simplifying that to replace all that to ultimately make the picture much simpler here. And so RUFUS will have a deterministic member, and we'll also have a 5-member ensemble. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. This modeling system will become operational at the end of August after the World Cup. And then when that happens, all these other models will be retired with the exception of the HER. The HER will continue to be run. So for those of you who heavily rely on that, you can keep anticipating it. But you can see the RUFUS is a very large domain model. It covers all of North America at this 3 kilometers from Alaska down to the Caribbean. It's going to do 18-hour forecasts every hour, but 4 times a day. It's going to do an 84-hour forecast. RUFUS, the ensemble system, which we call REFS, is going to do basically with 5 members, it's going to do 60-hour forecasts 4 times a day. So you're going to have a 5-member ensemble with a deterministic model. So in the end, 6, and these are going to have physics diversity. They're trying to get ultimately a lot of spread. These are largely tuned to try to get convection right. So hope that wind will come along with it, but it's really focused on convection. Again, the domain is all in North America, but because the data volume is so large, one day of RUFUS data, is 84 terabytes of data. So to try to simplify that to users, we're going to create a lot of cutouts, smaller domains that you can download instead. That data will be available on the NOAA Open Data Dissemination Platform, which is on AWS. Smoke and dust forecasts will continue to be part of this forecast system, but it's only going to be in the deterministic member, the control member, not in the ensembles. And just a minor point, we recently discovered after the code was frozen that there's a lag in our radiation. it's lagged by about 30 minutes. And so that's going to be something you'll have to account for if you use it. But we've done some work. Jonah Shaw, who's in the audience today, David Larson is in the audience today. We did some evaluations a year ago looking at the Rufus ensemble and how well it did for solar energy. And we evaluated that solar energy for a 3-month period of time when the code was frozen so we could evaluate it. And in the end, we found that the HER forecast of solar energy at the surface and the Rufus control member were pretty comparable. And you can see in the highlighted terms here, the ones that have the best performance. Rufus member 2 also seemed to have a couple performing numbers. But in the end, the ensemble had much smaller numbers. And if you use the ensemble as a way to get the ensemble mean to get your solar radiation forecast, that'll be the most accurate. This paper is in review right now. The nice thing about Rufus and in particular REFs, its ensemble, is you can really start looking at it to look at probabilistic information as well as timing information. And so in the HER, we only outputted winds at 80 meters, on a 2D grid, which was available every 15 minutes. Again, the 15-minute output on 2D grids will be available, but we're also going to output winds at 160 and 320 meters too. And you can look at some of that with a system like DESI, the Dynamic Ensemble-Based Scenario for IDSS. IDSS is Information Decision Support Systems. So here's just an example. You can go to that website and these slides will be made available. You can select ultimately the Rufus over CONUS. And if you do that underneath the surface button, you will see wind power at the 3 different levels, 80, 160, and 320. And there's different statistics that you can indicate to look at the spread or the timing or the probability of certain events. And so you can actually look for, like in a 2-hour window, you can look for the probability of a ramp event or some sort. And so this is showing us as what's the probability the power is going to change by greater than 0.5. We have a generic sort of wind turbine model behind it to generate power from wind. And so you get a sense of what's the probability that you're going to have a change in your power production from wind turbines in a 2-hour period of time. And then you can also look in the DESI system about the timing. When's that timing likely to happen? And so you can see that this was associated with a boundary that was propagating from the northwest to the southeast. And so this type of decision support, basically processing of the ensemble was really quite powerful. One of the things that's in collaboration with the National Laboratory of the Rockies, that's formerly NREL, they actually were working, they've had for a long time their Wind Toolkit data set, which was a modeling data set at 2-kilometer resolution grid spacing from 2007 to 2013. And they wanted to sort of update that to bring it up to more modern times. And so what they've done is they've taken the HER forecast data from 2015 to 2025, and they've processed it to make it consistent with the formats from the Wind Toolkit. And they've done a lot of statistics, and they've showed that, and I'm showing bias on the left, RMSE in the middle, and then correlation coefficient on the right, and the HER-MET statistics, that's what they're going to call their basically repackaged HER data, have the best statistics over all of that. And this is at CONUS. And the work is currently happening right now to create a HER-MET product using the Alaska domain. HER has an Alaska domain, and so that's being generated right now. In NOAA research, we've tried to really get at clouds. And so for those of you who were able to attend last year, Stan Benjamin gave this talk because I was unable to travel, but Stan spent his time really talking about clouds in the model. We recognize that we have too few of clouds. And so we're trying to get our handle on that. And why do we have basically a positive bias in shortwave down? And so we're applying a machine learning based cloud typing algorithm. And we can see that our bias in clear sky scenes is very, very small. And this is for any forecast hour. These different colors are different forecast hours. And you can also see our initialization times, which are in the brown, also have very close to zero bias. So the model initialization is working well, but we're getting biases as you start to integrate out in the forecast. And so those forecast errors get largest when you have the deepest type of clouds that you can see over here, deep convection and basically anvil type clouds. And so to try to dig into that more, we're starting to look at what does our bias in shortwave radiation look like as a function of cloud type. And so you sort of have this 4x4 confusion matrix here, where down the diagonal is where the cloud fraction from the observations match the cloud fraction from the model. And you can see that when both of them have pretty overcast scenes, we have a 50 watt per meter squared bias. But when the model has smaller cloud fractions, then the bias gets quite a bit larger. But what we're really focused on, we recognize cloud fractions are tricky, but can we figure out how to get the cloud optical depth right, get enough liquid in the clouds? And so we're trying to understand why are we not getting enough liquid in our clouds? This is what Stan was talking about last year, was a lot of this has really been tracing back to understand what's going on. And we realize that we have a dry bias within the HER system. And so that dry bias is also going to exist in the Rufus system. But what we don't want is we don't want it to persist till I die. And so we're actually working to fix that right now. And so Rufus version 2 is under active development. And we think we know what's going on. What we see is that when you compare moisture from radiosondes, this is over a 15-year period almost, the sondes are suggesting the model is too moist. If you look at aircraft observations of water vapor, the aircraft say the model is too dry. All the other evidence that we have, like clouds, suggests our model is too dry. So we've been exploring this and realized that ultimately we're seeing that our radiosondes that launched by the Weather Service have a dry bias. And so we're working to address that dry bias. We have a paper that's going to be just submitted to BAMS probably within the month that kind of outlines what's happening there. When you have an NWP model, there's lots of things that you prognose, and there's several things you'd like to diagnose. One of the things we want to be able to diagnose is cloud variability, and in particular, solar radiation variability. So some colleagues of mine, Kelly Bones and Laura Ramaki, were looking at machine learning to try to predict ways to predict solar variability given a particular cloud type and cloud cover. And the model is actually pretty successful. It has pretty good skill. And we've evaluated it over these sites here across the United States. These are from the SURFRAD stations as well as the ARM locations. And we're actually showing that we can do a pretty good job diagnosing solar variability at the surface. And so this is something that probably in the future may be a new diagnostic we add to the model. You can add it as sort of model agnostic. It doesn't need the HER or the Rufus for it. You can use it for any modeling system. And then kind of my last main topic here is been doing a lot of work with the Wind Forecast Improvement Project, WFIP3. This was a field campaign and analysis effort that was really focused on offshore wind off the east coast of the United States. The field campaign was from February 24 to August of 25. All that data is quality controlled. You can get it from the DOE Wind Data Hub. So you just Google DOE Wind Data Hub and all the data is available there. We have an overview that's been in review for a while, should be accepted this iteration that Anthony Karincich has been leading. We've looked at lots of different processes and everything from turbulent mixing to interactions with the surface and the impact of waves on the low level winds, et cetera. And in particular, we've evaluated the HER in this offshore environment. We notice the HER takes the sea surface temperature as a boundary condition. So this is specified. It comes from somewhere else and specified to us. If that boundary condition is wrong, it actually creates a stability issue in our model, and therefore the forecast can be off. But when the boundary condition is right, which is somebody else's modeling problem, we're able to capture stability very nicely in the HER. We were able to demonstrate it with this field campaign. We actually didn't know ahead of time because we've had very little data at sea where you have profiling information. But we did realize that our low-level jets offshore were too weak. And so we had too much mixing in the model. We were able to make those improvements into Rufus version 2, and it's much more accurate now. And that's improving our forecast of winds in other locations too. And then we're working to improve the clouds because we had a nice cloud data set as part of that campaign. But here's just some examples. On the left, what you have is a wind speed comparison as a function of time of day on the x-axis by height. On the y, the observations are the left column, the HER is in the middle column. And then on the right-hand side, the 4x4 over there is a stability comparison. And so in a general sense, you can see the HER does generally a very good job capturing the diurnal cycle of wind speed and the stratification in the marine boundary layer as part of this campaign. But then when you start digging in, then you can start to see that there is some dependence of the low-level shear and stability on wind direction. And this is where we were able to see the low-level jet influences because the low-level jets in that offshore region are predominantly from the Southwest. And so we were able to make some market improvements, and that improvements are incorporated into the models. And so, whoops, sorry, the very sensitive pad. And so this is showing that basically the change in the bias. And on the right-hand side, that's the reduction of the bias. And so you can see we've reduced the biases in our new experimental model by 10, 20, 40% in some of these cases of whether it's the height of the low-level jet nose, the speed at the low jet nose, the shear below the nose, et cetera. And you can really see in a time height cross-section, here's what the observations are showing. This is what the current version of HER in operations are showing, and this is what the new model would give you. And so it's a much better forecast as part of that. And then sort of my last message, and this is sort of setting the stage for Sue, who's going to come up a little bit later, is everything I just showed you is from basically physics-based weather prediction modeling systems. There's been a real revolution in using AI-based weather prediction. And so we've been working into this area, building something that we are calling the HERcast. It's actually meant to be a computationally inexpensive way to come up with an ensemble for the HER. It started using GraphCast, which was published, but then we realized that it was actually not very efficient and not efficient for handling such a big domain like the continental United States. And so we've come up with our own method to do it that improved our computational efficiency for training, some of the loss functions, so we can really train it for what we want. In our training, by the way, we're focusing on convection, not winds, not solar radiation. So, just so you know, we're not focusing on those, so I don't necessarily expect any real skill there. But anyway, we're really focusing on trying to get that. And version 1 has already been published and is actually being run as part of Project Eagle. We have version 3 already running here. So this is really changing the game and how often you can retrain. And ultimately, the mistake we should not fall into is version 2 does not necessarily mean it's better than version 1. It just means it was retrained. And that is something very different. So, in the end, we have to really get up with nice verification systems to really make sure these are doing what you want. So I'll just wrap up here. We're continuing to try to evaluate HER under a range of different conditions to try to understand what drives biases in the model so that we can improve them. These improvements are getting into Rufus version 2. That Rufus version 2, we can't change version 1. That code is frozen as part of the handoff, and it'll become operational at the end of August. But in Rufus version 2, that's going to be aiming for something like 2028 when it will become operational. But I will say Rufus version 2, the experimental version, is the first modeling system in a decade that's beat the HER in a convection forecast. And it's done it twice in controlled field campaigns, experiment type things in the Weather Service. And we have a strong focus on this AI for weather prediction, but really been focusing on convection. So it may be another year or two before we start looking at other applications such as the ones this community cares about. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you. If you have any questions, certainly feel free to email me or when we get to the discussion.
And I actually think it's worthwhile just asking if there's any clarifying questions for Dave, just real short ones. Nope. Okay. Oh. Go ahead.
So with Rufus, production of August 31st, is there any way that we can start taking that non-production versions?
Yeah, we've been putting experimental Rufus on the AWS cloud server already. Okay. So it's there. For those, the NOAA nod gives instructions on how to pull those down if you haven't done it already. Yep.
Okay, so next we're going to move on to Dr. Sue Haupt's talk on blending observations and physical models and AI ML techniques to produce accurate weather models. Take it away, Sue.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, so we heard all about a physical model, ended with an AI model, but everything still depends on observations as well. I'm going back in time a little bit to where we developed our approach, and it really was around a value chain. This is when we had our big DOE-funded solar power forecasting project. And what we wanted to do, and we started the project thinking, what is our end goal? Of course, it's try to improve the economics of running a system that has a large amount of solar power. And then also the social values of trying to decrease CO2. On the far left of our value chain, we have weather, and it happens. For solar energy, the weather we care about most is clouds and aerosols. So of course, as we progress along that value chain, we need to monitor. We have lots of different types of ways to monitor, some existing, some new. Model, again, some existing, some we built WRF Solar during this project. We forecast by blending the models in smart ways, both for very short term as well as day ahead, so that we could make forecasts and disseminate that to the end users in terms of point and area forecasts, so that they then have to perceive it in a smart way and make decisions. For instance, day-ahead planning, real-time operation, so that they would then be making those outcomes by allocating units, running reserves smartly, and then looking at changes in the economics through production cost changes, as well as running the reserves smarter. So by thinking in terms of what is the end goal and progressing along this value chain, that helped us to build a complete system that looks something like this, where we called it the sun forecast system. This is just a wiring diagram. We have a day ahead system, a nowcast system, and you'll notice that there's a lot of observations. That's the dark blue of these. The models are all in light blue, and the ones that are circled in red are the AI models. So it's the observations combined with the physical models. Some of them run specifically for the project, some of them grabbing the best there exists, such as the HER, but running also the new WRF solar at the time, having both a day ahead, integrating them, coming up with the dynamic integrated forecast system. But then, of course, to provide that value, had to convert to power, quantify uncertainty using an analog ensemble, and then the output was a probabilistic power forecast. And we found that we were able to provide value by engineering it this way. Okay, what are some of these types of AI models? Well, some of them are standalone AI models which use weather variables, but we try to use them intelligently. For instance, this is a solar curve, global horizontal irradiance. The green is the top of the atmosphere solar. But then if we look at it according to the type of day, we see there's very different behavior. On a clear day, we have that blue curve, partly cloudy day, the red curve, and one of our few very cloudy days in Colorado, the black curve. Can we use that type of information to improve a forecast? And yes, we did study that. Our baseline is on the right, clearness index persistence. That takes into account the changing solar angle of what we would expect. In other words, clouds stay the same, solar angle changes. On the far left, we're just basically applying a standard artificial neural network and then converting to clearness index to do the comparison. But down the middle, we're classifying into regimes using a k-means clustering before we apply the neural net. And you see here that when we cluster into those regimes, we did have some very distinct regimes that we found. Did that help? Okay, this table shows the standard neural net had a 13.7% improvement over the clearness index persistence, while the regime-dependent version had 18.6. And that is if you have enough data to be able to train for your specific sites. Now, what about when you go along on longer time scales? I mentioned the DICAST framework, Dynamic Integrated Forecast System. What is that? NCAR developed this back in the 1990s and has been updating it ever since. Still one of the best AI forecasting systems, but it brings in all the physical models. First thing it does is a bias correction of each of them, and then an optimal weighting into an integrator before turning it into the power forecast that you want. And what we find with DICAST is, if you look at the error versus lead time, DICAST is the solid black line. The colored lines are all the individual models after bias correction. And by design, because we're optimizing to root mean square error, DICAST is always less error. And in fact, we find it typically improves about 10 to 15% for wind. But then on top of that, one of our other foundational systems is the analog ensemble. We heard about the HER ensemble. These physical ensembles are valuable, but they take a long time to run. You can build, if you have a really good deterministic member, you can go back in time and using historical data, construct an analogous ensemble. And we find that even WRF solar, on the left, you see the biases. WRF solar, the bias had been much lower than previous. But when we apply the analog ensemble, either with or without a bias correction algorithm, that it goes a lot lower. So it does improve the ensemble average forecast. On the right, you're seeing the black lines are the observations. After applying die-cast, already a big improvement is the red line. And then the analog ensemble mean is the dashed yellow. But the thing about having this ensemble, which is really just a historical ensemble constructed, we're able to get the probabilistic information as well. And it's been shown to quantify the uncertainty as good as many of the best ensemble systems that exist. Okay, so a more modern system that we have that forecasts both wind and solar was built for Kuwait, the Kuwait Renewable Energy Prediction System, or CREPS. And again, the outlined in blue, dark blue, we have physical models. Very important. You see observations in the green boxes go in, also very important. But then including AI methods, things like StatCast for wind as well as solar, bringing in die-cast, applying analog ensemble. They wanted us to add together the uncertainties for wind and solar. Of course, that's not a direct addition of probabilities. So we applied a technique called the Shockey Shuffle that was able to come out with a wind plus solar probability that worked very well at their small experimental wind farm. Now, we've heard so much about the AI weather prediction models. And last year I gave a full talk on the evolution of that. This figure just summarizes. On the top line, you see post-processing that has been going on for a very long time and will continue into the future as well. We have also been emulating parameterizations. Some began a long time ago. We're continuing with that, including some very new work. The full AIWP models really didn't start until in around 2018, ECMWF published about a toy model. And then in 2020, Dale Duran and his student published the first paper showing that AIWP could improve upon, and they were looking primarily at seasonal forecasting, but that began the explosion. And that came partly from having the ERA 5 reanalysis that we can train on, as well as computer power advancing to where the deep learning makes a big difference. And of course, we don't want to ignore the data and assimilation end-to-end prediction. ECMWF is playing with that now, finding that they can build OBS-only AI weather prediction models quite successfully, showing some nice improvements. Now, usually their loss functions, as well as their assessment, focuses on variables like 500 hectopascal winds. Most of us don't live at 500 millibars, and we don't have any wind or solar farms there. So what we really care about is our boundary layer wind and solar. And when you start looking at some of the difficult sites, like this plot is from Copper Mountain, here up in the mountains above Denver here. And I think it shows the striking difference. The observations are the solid black lines. This is from a recently submitted paper that Jared here in the front led this work. GFS, NOAA, somewhat better. The global physical IFS, not too good. And AIFS, the ECMWS AI model, is way down here. So cannot capture winds in complex terrain. Now we look at the HER, the 3-kilometer HER, all the difference in the world. We're a lot closer to realistic winds in complex terrain. So what we're saying here is that there is a lot of hype. There have been a lot of advances with AIWP, but be careful how you use it. Is it fit for the purpose? Are they evaluating on variables you care about? At NCAR, we're developing a new system called Beacon as a test bed to analyze for end users the types of decisions they need. How are the AIWP models doing? And one of the sectors that that's being built for is the energy sector. So the question is, does that particular model meet the needs of our sector, by getting the types of variables we care about? And also, which model is best for the probabilistic prediction of the right variable for the right use? And this beacon, it's still being developed, but we're finding that we can do assessment that is more on par for what the end user cares about. So in summary, modern forecasting systems to optimize start with observations. Knowing what the real world is doing is still key. Physical models bring in a lot of information that the AI models are not capturing yet, but the AI machine learning techniques as part of a full system can make huge improvements and should be part of the system. The new AIWP models, they're showing a lot of promise, but be careful what variables they're assessing for, and the standard assessment methods may not be looking at the variables we care about, so it may not be as good as we thought for the use case that we care about. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, for that fascinating talk. And I think it's really important to acknowledge this use case situation with AIFS not doing very well with those winds in the complex topography. There is a tendency to just jump on things. There's been a lot of press reports about how good AIFS is. So anyway, next up we have Lars Rower, who is going to speak to us about using AI for operational forecast production.
Yes, thank you. Let's start with a slide about our company. We are EMSIS. We are based in Germany, Oldenburg, so northwestern part of Germany. We are around 250, I think it's around 270 now employees. And we have operations on all continents. Yes, there's a German research station on Antarctica, and you can forecast a wind farm there. And we have more than 20 years of experience in forecasting wind and PV. And for every 15 minutes, we forecast about 1 terawatt of installed capacity of solar and wind farms worldwide. So that's more than 100,000 individual farms. We are divided a bit in 3 parts of the company. There's EMSIS Grid. He is a colleague of this company as well. So they are doing more or less grid operations and grid forecasts. Then we have Energy Meteor Systems as a wind and solar forecasting company apart, and EMSIS VPP, it's a virtual power plant for handling your individual farms to curtailments, things like this. For the AI, it's a bit what Sue said. So when you think about AI and forecast, you mostly think about the AI weather prediction models as an alternative to the NVP models. But to use them operational in the forecast is hard at the moment. So it's not that you have nothing. So you have to be better than the physical NVP approach, and that it's nothing what AI models can do at the moment. So there are relevant parameters missing, or the resolution is not as good. So it's what Sue was talking about with complex terrain, things like this. So there's resolution missing. And a study by the German research Karlsruhe Institute of Technology and the University of Geneva. The study says, physics-based models outperform AI weather models for record-breaking extremes. And most of when we talk about grid operators, you care about good forecasts, but you really care about good forecasts in extreme events. And there is a lack in AI models at the moment. It's the same what we can see in Germany. So there was a typical low pressure system developed in Great Britain area, moved across the North Sea to Scandinavia with high wind speeds in northern parts of Germany. The NVP models predicted high wind speeds, high cutout wind speeds, and I had a look in 3 or 4 AI models. There was not even storm. So it's the lack of resolution just doesn't really help in forecasting this interesting weather situations. But it's not everything bad about AI. You can use AI in the forecasts. And for the US market, first perspective, you're asking what I'm talking about, curtailments, very extreme curtailments. It's something what's quite different to the US market. So in the US, you have more or less a load problem. So you have the data centers, ACs and things like this. You don't have these in Europe. And that's why, you don't see this heavy curtailments mostly in the US market. There are some situations, probably there was this winter event in the PJM region with the load forecast far off, and then they curtailed more or less all of the renewable energies, but these are very rare events. And in the European market, you see this very hard curtailments, mostly, even this is in Spain example, you see it there mostly every day till from, spring to autumn. And you have to try to forecast this because the grid operator wants to know what's happening. So how many curtailments there will be grid related or due to the market. And you can see the green is NVP based basic forecast without AI information. And it's okay, it's working good, but during this curtailment moments, it's far off. Probably you can see the curtailments are mostly around noon, and it looks like a bit PV. So of course, wind is curtailed because there's too much PV production. So you have in Spain about 50 gigawatts installed capacity of PV and around 30 of wind. And you have a load normally around 20 to 30 gigawatt. So you have much more installed capacity than the load. And now you have the red one is with added AI information. So the AI helps you to add much more information to the forecast. And this is an example from last week. And you have a day ahead and a 2 day ahead forecast, and the AI curtailment forecast works quite well. I think to do it better is quite hard. And so it's not an extremely new forecast. It's we add with AI information to the basic green one and have the new curtailment forecast. And it's not a Spain problem or situation. You see such behavior in many countries in Europe, such as Poland or Germany. And that's something what we're talking about now. So feel like it's last Friday. So 2 p.m. You have this forecast for wind for Germany. And on the right-hand side, you have the spot market prices for Saturday, so the day ahead. I have shown here in the graph the 2 day ahead as well, but let's start with the day ahead. And that's a Saturday. So probably some of you want to imagine. So you can be a forecaster now. What would you think? Give me some numbers. How much curtailments will there be? How many curtailments we had last Saturday in Germany in wind due to the market? So someone wants to try? No? So, okay. Then we add some AI informations here. And you can see the green one. So the graph is destroyed a bit, but the green one is the AI added information of the market curtailments. And it's more or less about 30 to 35 gigawatts, just market-related curtailments in wind in maximum around noon last Saturday. And now we want to add the real measurement. And you can see, as in the Spain example, even for last Saturday, in Germany, the day-ahead forecast for the market-related curtailments worked quite well. So with this added AI information to the basic forecast, you really can forecast these curtailments, in this case, quite well. There are some times with extreme events. We had on Easter Sunday in Germany, combined wind and PV around 45 gigawatts curtailed due to the market. So not just the grid operator is added, but just due to the market for around 45 gigawatts. And that's quite hard to forecast because it's an extreme event, but in this normal events, so we have these 35 on Saturday and around 30 on Sunday. This is easier to forecast with this AI information. The last thing is as well, a bit like Sue's presentation. You can, so I have shown some forecast based on normal physical forecast. Now our research department is working on more or less more AI forecasts. It's the analog ensemble approach. So you get these NVP model parameters data, and you want to forecast the right day here. And I don't know if I can use the mouse. So you want to forecast this day. Then you have a look at the different parameters from NVP models. You look at the days before. In this case, there are 3 days, but normally you use 1 year, 2 years of data. And then you compare the information from the NVP models to the day you want to forecast. And then you have a look at the measurement that really came in. And then you can use the deviation between what was forecasted from the different NVP models with the different parameters, and can create a new forecast based on this information. So you still have this physical approach underlying, but you add some more information. But as also Sue said, it's very, you need a lot of computer power. It's very intensive. And that's why it's hard to use it operational at the moment. But we have done an evaluation for some parts of California. And the blue one always is new AI forecast. The red one is a normal NVP-based forecast, and the green one is another. We try to forecast more the fog, and it's just for included in the evaluation. What you can see, the bias, it's the average one, is quite around zeros, quite well biased, even in the morning hours when we have some foggy days in the California region. And overall, it's a 1 year evaluation from February 25 to February 26. You can see even in RMSE and in MIE, the AI forecast is outperforming the traditional forecasts. But as I said, it's hard to use operational at the moment. We have to work on the performance. And there's even some, we can even improve the AI forecast, because at the moment it's just based on 5 points in the region. And it's because, a lot of data. And when we use more points in such a region, then the forecast might be even better. And AMSUS just don't want a real only AI forecast. We always want to be explainable, and that's how we use a bit, or that's our 3 examples how we use AI at the moment in the company. Thank you.
I have a really quick clarifying question for you, actually, Lars. The example you were showing with the pricing, was that real-time pricing being fed back into the forecast, or was it historical pricing for particular days? I think it was real-time, but I was trying to understand.
It was not real-time. It was the day-ahead price. So it was the price from Friday, June, 4 p.m. for the day-ahead. So it was the Friday day-ahead price for Saturday.
I see.
So it's with intraday prices, it's much easier to forecast. Right. It's a day-ahead forecast, and it's even working quite well.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Craig Collier, who is the Chief Meteorologist for energy forecasting solutions. Craig is going to speak about using ensemble AI models to better predict ramping events. Thanks, Craig.
Okay, thanks, Justin, for the introduction. And yeah, thanks for your attendance of this session. Just on the theme of AI and its use in renewable energy predictions, I'd like to talk a little bit today about wind ramping in particular, and the use of AI models in ensembles to potentially improve or measure the effectiveness of those ensembles for better predicting wind ramps. So wind power ramps are events that really drive a disproportionate and significant economic exposure for grid operators and forecast vendors, mainly through economic and, well, really imbalanced costs. And so we've seen that AI, WP, can potentially help to improve forecasts, predictions of some synoptic scale variables that are important for wind and solar prediction, as well as potentially for ramps as well. We know that a lot of that forecast production could occur kind of at a sort of a fraction of the cost of using physics-based models. So there is some incentive there to measure how well these AI WP models could perform under significantly volatile conditions for wind. Ensembles are now being operationalized, making use of AI at a number of leading forecasting centers around the world. And just in the last year, that effort's really occurred in earnest with systems set up to better predict certain forecast variables related to renewable energy and in wind and solar. Where ensembles are very useful is, of course, for kind of trying to minimize initial condition error in physics-based errors. So with the combination of AI and ensemble techniques, it's a natural question to, as to whether or not, the combination of these could potentially help to better predict ramp events at a less costly forecast production price. So just by way of, sorry, let's see, not sure that's advancing down there. Sorry, a little bit of a lag there. Sorry. Okay, there we go. So by way of background, the NOAA's EAGLE project, this is the experimental AI global and limited area ensemble forecast system that we've heard a little bit about this morning or this afternoon, is sort of a development environment for production of AI models and AI weather prediction, as well as AI ensemble systems. And the AIGEFS, which has been operationalized at NOAA recently, is sort of a direct outcome of the Project Eagle, making use of some of the techniques used for creating distinct initial conditions for the GEFS model to be driven from, and incorporating into that an AI model from Google, the GraphCast model. So there are a number of different AI ensembles that we could choose to sort of study the effectiveness of wind ramp forecasting with ensembles. We sort of narrowed down for this particular study the NOAA models, the NOAA family of models, including the GEFS, which is the purely physics-based ensemble system that's been operational for a number of years. It consists of 31 members, each of which is uniquely initialized with perturbed initial conditions, and then has stochastic physics applied to it to provide diversification through initial conditions as well as through physics perturbations. The AIGFS, which is the AI sibling of the physics-based GFS, takes the same GFS perturbed initial conditions, propagates them through a GraphCast model with calibrated sets of weights distinct for each member to provide initial condition and machine learning diversity. The HGFS is sort of the grand ensemble. It is the union of the AIGFS and the GFS systems, provide a 62-member ensemble, providing initial condition, physics, and machine learning diversity, all three of them. And then a fourth one that we're considering for this study just happens to overlap with the period of study that we had for this project. And that's the prototype machine learning GEFS, which was more of a development model, I believe, associated with Project Eagle. It's no longer operational, but its output is archived and in the same form as that of the AIGEFS and the other ensembles. So we made use of that as part of our intercomparison study to measure how well it performed against some of the existing operational products. PML-GFS is a little bit distinct from the AIGEFS, does make use of the same perturbed initial conditions from the GEFS, but its GraphCast is driven with slightly distinct sets of weights from the AIGEFS that are more or less uncalibrated. So they're a little bit more, less risk averse, I should say, to certain very noisy outcomes than the AIGEFS would be with its more calibrated sets of weights. But like the AIGEFS, the PML-GFS does allow for the quantification of initial condition and machine learning diversity and diversifies the ensemble members in those ways. So the study area that we looked at was in the upper Midwest, about 140 different wind farms across Minnesota and Iowa. And we focused in on early to mid-fall of last year, November 1st to November 19th, defining a ramp as any 6 hour or any under 6 hour change in aggregate for aggregate generation that is greater than or equal to 15% of the portfolio capacity. And we separated by up ramps and down ramps that population of ramps that met that definition. The model data we pulled was from these ensembles, these individual ensemble members. So the basically fixed height winds, as well as ambient condition data that's useful for the forecast modeling and power conversion modeling, and ultimately aggregation of the portfolio. And we did calibration of the individual ensembles through the BCVI, our bias corrected variance inflation technique, applied each model and per lead time. There are a couple of different ways to make use of ensembles for forecasting. One is deterministic, the other one is probabilistic. The deterministic framework really just sort of uses the ensemble average, the average of the individual members as a forecast, and is sort of directly comparable to a deterministic NWP model. The probabilistic framework allows for the forecasting with the individual members and looking at the distribution of those members, in particular how that distribution fits to the actuals and what it says about the likelihood of particular scenarios or events occurring. So in the former, you're sort of measuring forecast validity using standard error metrics like MAE and RMSE. In the latter, you're using metrics like the CRPS, the cumulative rank probability score, which really measures the skill of the distribution at fitting to the actuals. But when collapsed down to a single member in an ensemble, it's really just the MAE. And the lower the CRPS, the lower the MAE, the better the forecast, much like the MAE. So over the 50 days that we had as part of our study period, we identified about 100 different ramps. Many of these were not particularly significant. Some were quite significant, and they were mostly related to sort of large-scale frontal passages through the region at this time of the year. The distribution of ramps is pretty symmetric, so about the same number of down ramps as up ramps, maybe a slightly higher tendency for down ramping than up ramping for this particular region and for this particular time of the year, but otherwise fairly normal shape distribution for ramps. I'm just looking at the deterministic form of the ensembles and measuring how the ensemble means performed during ramping hours. We're looking at the GEFS here in black, the AIGEFS in red, the PML, that prototype machine learning GEFS in blue, and then the HGFS, which is again the combination of the AI GFS and the physics-based GFS in magenta, and their overall MAE scores against lead time for ramp events during this 50-day period. You can see pretty clearly that the GEFS still has the lowest ramp MAE, improves to about 15% or so at day 2. The PML and AIGFS ensembles are relatively close to each other in terms of their performance. And the HGFS is really much less performant and has MAEs on the average of 19 to 20% or so across lead times for the ramp events in this particular period. So this is a case of wherein what we think is happening is the HGFS is just having a bit of a dilution effect, wherein combining the AI members with the physics-based members, we're overall washing out some variability there and causing some greater errors during some of the volatile periods of the samples of the study. When determining, how to blend the ensemble NWP with the deterministic NWP during ramps, the GEFS sort of wins out here as well, reducing the overall MAE from the deterministic blend by anywhere from 2.5% to 3.5% or so. The PML GEFS sort of closely follows behind that, contributing some significant improvement. But the AIGFS is, again, sort of hurting the forecast. It's not performing as well, and overall raises the errors associated with these ramp events. Looking at the probabilistic side of the fence, interestingly enough, the CRPS score that is minimized here belongs to the PML GEFS. That's that prototype machine learning ensemble. Really out to just beyond the day-ahead horizons, it's performing better as an ensemble in a probabilistic framework for catching ramps than any of the other ensembles are, but becomes competitive with the GFS at about the day-ahead timeframe and on out. The HGFS is competitive with the GFS throughout the scope of the sort of horizons considered here. And the AIGFS, as we saw before for the MEE, is much higher than the others. So it's sort of falling outside the mean there. If you were to sort of ask yourself, which is the better way of looking at these ensembles in order to detect ramps, really the probabilistic form wins out in a pretty clear way. In other words, if you were to say, set a threshold of number of members that need to predict a ramp in order to assess that you have a ramp in your forecast, that's going to be far more effective for catching ramps than actually using the ensemble mean, because the ensemble mean of any of these ensembles sort of does tend to minimize some of the variability and washes it out. One of the clearest examples of that is with the HGFS, which shows fairly low probability of detection, among the lowest of all of the ensembles when used in its deterministic form, but is among the highest in the probabilistic form. And the reason for that is just that you're boosting your detection by adding or doubling the number of members in the ensemble, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee you're adding value to your forecast. So one of the ways to measure that value is through something called the ROC curve, a sort of a signal detection theory measure that just looks at the relationship between hit rate and false alarm rate for these ramp forecasts, trying to minimize the false alarms and maximize the hits, and sort of keeping your ensembles as close to the left-hand side of these charts as possible in order to accomplish that. So you see here that really the HGFS, though it has a very high probability of detection, also has a fairly high false alarm rate and is not particularly well balanced. So thus making it less discriminating. It tends to not discriminate actual ramps very well, whereas the PML GEFS and the GFS do a much better job with that. That extends out to the 48-hour time frame as well. Like I mentioned the earlier slide, these big wind ramp events that are very well correlated across systems do contribute a lot of economic risk and exposure to operators. If you were just measuring from pure publicly available market data, the spreads, the day-ahead to real-time spreads and prices on volatile days versus non-volatile days, the price volatility is about 50% higher at a minimum on some of these big ramp days. And so that contributes sort of in an annualized sense. You're extrapolating out what we saw for this 50-day period to an imbalance exposure on the order of several tens of millions of dollars for just this particular portfolio. So if you are trying to reduce your imbalance exposure there, the way to do that is, of course, with good forecasts. And if you're trying to incorporate any of these ensembles into your forecast in order to make that reduction, to make that mitigation, the GEFS here still kind of clearly wins out. It has really the lowest average imbalance cost per ramp hour of any of the ensembles, with the AIGFS, though, really almost at parity with it a day ahead, which is sort of non-intuitive based on what we've seen of the AIGFS. It just so happens that in this particular period, there were a couple of very, very expensive days where the spreads were very large, and the AIGFS just happened to sort of nail it. But on the average, it did not perform well and had higher MAE and higher CRPS than the other ensembles. You see the HGFS is strikingly much more exposed, much more costly to make use of for minimizing the imbalance exposure. And that's really, again, because of the dilution effect. What we saw is really for a number of events, the AI members were showing one level of variability, and the physics-based GFS members were not showing much variability at all, or vice versa. And when that happened, it sort of canceled out the effect and created periods of no variability when there should have been variability. So overall, in summary, the GFS really still has the lowest ramp CRPS and MAE at all leads, that at least in this particular study. The NWP diversity really outperformed the AI members for ramp forecasting. The HGFS, it brackets a lot of ramps, but it also had a fairly high false alarm ratio associated with it, making it less discriminating. The GFS, I think, still provides the best ramp accuracy, still sort of the best, sort of the benchmark in terms of the global ensembles that we've looked at least in this limited study, relative to the other ensemble forecasts and the AI ones in particular that we looked at. And one of the takeaways is that more members does not necessarily equal better ramp skill, as we saw with the HGFS. One key takeaway is that the ensemble construction really matters here in terms of how these AI ensembles are put together. I included the PML-GFS not only because it was convenient and since we had a record of it in the archive for this particular study, but also because it provided a little bit of a interesting takeaway that the way it's constructed with its uncalibrated GraphCast weights may have actually benefited it in terms of how it forecasts ramps. It's less constrained, less optimized to sort of minimize mean square error in the mean, in the long term potentially, whereas the AI GFS is much more controlled and is not allowed to go rogue, so to speak. So there's also some different penalty functions there that may also have played a role in the construction of those two ensembles. But future work, we could certainly extend this study to look at other geographies and other periods of time, other seasons, to see if some of these features and characterizations persist or are reliable, and certainly taking a look at the REFS. That's sort of our next step, and how the Rufus ensemble performs using the same kinds of tests and examination metrics is worthwhile. So, and answer any questions. Thank you.
Any clarifying questions for Craig?
I was struck in your previous slide that the forecast scale at 48 hours seemed to be better than at 6 hours. Is it a fluke? Is it real? Yes. What's causing it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is something I've observed with some of these coarser scale ensemble forecast systems, that they do tend to improve with some of these features that we look for and evaluate with wind forecasting. I don't exactly have a much better explanation than that, except to say that the ones that performed well outside of the HGFS did tend to show a slight improvement in the forecasting, the forecastability of some of the ramp events in the deterministic framework as we moved out a little bit in time. And it may have just been the way that they were better simulating some of the semi-hemispheric sort of atmospheric features that were driving the ramp in the longer horizons as opposed to some of the shorter horizons. But that's a good question.
Thank you, Craig. So there was a huge amount to absorb there, and I was scribbling notes. I think in hindsight that I probably should have set things up to allow people to ask clarifying questions as we went along, because there was quite a lot of information there. So I do have what I wanted to do was make sure we had lots of time for a robust discussion so that folks could ask more detailed questions associated with this theme of AI weather prediction and machine learning techniques to convert those the weather forecasts into power forecasts and predictions for the grid. I have some seed questions for that, but I invite audience members to come up and ask that. But also, if you have specific clarifying questions, if there's anything's on your mind from any of the speakers, feel free to jump up and ask those as well. But I'll start off with one of my seed questions. And this is, as I'm thinking about all of these different opportunities that all these different pieces of research that we've seen today and the opportunities, as panelists, where do you see this going in the future? Do you see the machine learning and AI methods as being predominantly utilized in the sort of the weather to power linkage, or do you see AI weather prediction becoming the predominant source of weather information that then feeds into these downstream models, which will also have the machine learning aspects to them? Or can you perhaps see maybe an alternative where we go directly from inputs through a trained model to a sort of an end-to-end system? Just sort of curious what the panelists think about that. I know that's a tough one to begin with.
Okay, Justin, that is there it is. Okay. That is a tough question. We have seen the evolution of using AI as a post-processor and also to build like parameterizations as being a first part of that evolution. And we've gotten a long ways that way. But the full AIWP has been catching up quickly. It's still limited, and as I pointed out, it doesn't always predict the variables we want at the places we want best. But I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see that evolve and become better too. The thing I advocate for, however, is including the meteorological knowledge in the models. We've observed that does add value when people try to train AI models just on time series and don't bring in the meteorological knowledge. It's not as good as if you include some aspect of the physics, even if it's the knowledge of the developer. The full OBS to machine learning answers, it's starting to develop. As I mentioned, DCMWF has some first models doing that using satellite observations. They're starting to talk about bringing in their whole data assimilation system. We're not there yet, but boy, it's going to be fun to watch that over the next few years.
So I'll echo, it's going to be really fun, but I would urge us to ask the question, what was this trained to predict, these AI models? If it was trained to predict storm location, then, the expectations that it's going to do winds or solar radiation is not going to be there. It could happen. A lot of our decisions are actually usually, joint distributions. I want to know about temperature as well as, winds, for example. And again, if it's trained to do that, then it can do that. I would say that at least the Met services, that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to come up with a general thing so that gets the spread they need, spread that can basically complement a physical model.
Yeah, I don't know if we look ahead at 10 years if we just use AI models, but probably for special regions or special AI models who are specialized for something that matters for the forecast. And I think what really can help is that the AI models can be created very fast. So you have the output very fast and that might help, but I'm not sure if we have the just AI forecast in 10 years. And another aspect is the extreme forecast. It's always hard with trained things to forecast something more or less new, and probably physical will be better here.
Yeah, I would say that, we've been currently, for a while, there's been really innovative use of machine learning as a flavor of AI within the wind power and solar power production industry for a while. And Lars showed kind of a good example of that. That's not necessarily AIWP necessarily, but I think there's always going to be value, even maybe in 10 years, of still blending the two different types of weather prediction as they provide the seed inputs to the power prediction process. And I think, right now the AI component of that is really speeding along. And that's kind of the next next step of this sort of revolution of the improvement of the power prediction process.
Yeah. And actually, just kind of a follow-up from that, when you're talking about blending forecasts in that way, and then producing ultimately a probabilistic type of output for the end user. So you spoke about, I think you called it the Shake Shuffle. I'm curious if you or any of the other folks on the panel have some ideas on how we can combine different forecasts from different models, and indeed different probabilities for, say, a wind forecast and a solar forecast, and for a wind solar and load forecasts, so that because that's the ultimate goal, right? The ultimate goal for the end user, the grid user, typically is to have a good understanding of where is my net load and what's my risk associated with my net load forecast. But and I've spoken with several folks from different utilities, ISO New England springs to mind straight away, where one of the concerns is that all of these physical models are sort of being used in wind forecasting and solar forecasting and load forecasting, but there's no real easy way to be able to take those forecasts and combine them into a single probabilistic type forecast that's answering that question. Any thoughts on that?
My main thought is a lot of these things that are impactful are 2 sigma events. How often do 2 sigma events appear in the training data set? And now there are ways to actually enhance the weight of those so that the training incorporates them. But again, you need to ask the question, are they doing it? The people building your tools, are they doing that?
Yeah, the AI models are typically evaluated on the mean, and Dave brought up a good point. That means that it always goes toward a mean rather than the extreme events. To really capture those extreme events, you do have to change the types of loss functions you're using, as well as do that resampling that Dave mentioned. So we aren't doing that in most of the standard models yet, but we can. Whether it's going to happen for AIWP, unlikely in the near future. It does take a long time to train those models.
Any other thoughts? Well, we've got a question from the audience, so we should go ahead and take that. And if you could just say your name and your affiliation.
Yeah, my name is Joe Roberts, ISO New England. So thanks for the shout out. It's very directly related. And to couch our perspective a little bit is that, when we're operating the grid, we're very concerned about the actual probabilistic risk that we can try to measure. So a lot of the talk that I've noticed at these conferences is about the ensembling approach of the NWPs or the AIWP models. Now, what are your thoughts on bridging that gap between an ensemble, cloud, or a spread into something that's actually probabilistic, where we can trust the probabilities to almost, actuarially account for risk? Be interested in your perspective on that.
So to paraphrase what you're saying is, can we build an AI model that actually doesn't predict the weather, but predicts the impacts?
Or predict scenarios that we can assign probabilities to when we pass it through the filter of what does our load, what does our net load look like, our load, wind, solar.
And that's really an important aspect too, is we usually just build those uncertainty bars around it and have the shaded areas. But if we know what the end user really wants, you want to build those scenarios, we can pull out, say the 90th percent probability, give you that scenario and let you run it through whatever model you need to look at the impact for your industry. That could be done, but for the most part, we aren't doing it. A few groups, from what I'm aware, do it. Lars, I thought I heard Energy and Media doing that in some cases. Do you? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I think it should work now.
It's working.
So yeah, there are some probabilistic or uncertainty approaches, we try to give our customers, to give them these situations or examples that they can be aware. So it's mostly in the ISO sector.
And we have techniques in meteorology and operational meteorology where we try to calibrate our spread skill of an ensemble. I think that's where, especially since we're caring about tail events, that's where we need to probably put more focus is how do we actually calibrate, tail events? By definition, they're hard.
And even we've experienced in New England peaks of 26,000 megawatts and midday minimum loads of just over 5,000 megawatts. And so one of those really sunny spring days in New England, that load gets really low. And being able to estimate the probability that these events are happening, as those kind of low load events are happening more often is a really interesting problem that we're working on too. Thank you.
That's a great question. Thanks. Got another one from the audience.
Frédéric Fabry, McGill University. Optimizing methods in general, of which AI is a form of, are excellent at optimizing for the quantity that you say that you're interested in, and to do it at the expense of everything else that you didn't realize that you needed. Right now, the AI methods seem to be, certainly the NWP seems to be geared at the standard meteorological variables that we care of, 500 millibar patterns, things like that. While clearly for renewable energy, we're interested in a set of very peculiar variables, at least as far as meteorologists are